Sofia Reeves arrived at Hale Tower every morning before the city fully woke up. She came on the first bus, the one that smelled like cold air and overnight workers. And she carried a canvas bag with her lunch inside and a small thermos of black coffee that she made at home. Because buying it outside was a luxury she could no longer afford. She was 41 years old. She had the kind of face that people described as striking when they bothered to look at it, which was almost never. Most days, nobody looked at Sofia at all. That was the nature of the work. She had understood that from the very first week. The cleaning staff at Hale Tower existed the way furniture existed, present and necessary, but never really noticed. The marble floors of the building's lobby gleamed because of Sofia and the 4 other women on her shift. But the bankers and lawyers and executives who walked across those floors every morning never once glanced down to consider how they stayed that way. They looked at their phones. They looked at each other. They looked at everything except the woman pushing the mop bucket toward the service elevator. Sofia did not resent them for it. She had told herself that a long time ago, and most days she believed it. Resentment was a weight she could not afford to carry. She had Donna to think about. And Donna needed her clear-headed and steady and present in a way that bitterness never allowed a person to be. Donna was 16, and she had a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which affected her connective tissue and meant that her joints dislocated more easily than they should, and that she lived with a level of daily pain that no teenager should have to know. The treatment was ongoing. The physical therapy was ongoing. The medications were ongoing. And all of it cost money that Sofia earned 1 shift at a time, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when they needed the extra hours. Preston Hale owned the building. He owned 4 other buildings in the city as well, along with a hotel portfolio that stretched across 3 states and a real estate development, a company that his father had started and that Preston had tripled in value through a combination of genuine intelligence and a complete absence of mercy. He was 46, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that assessed everything in a room, including people, and a smile that only appeared when something was going in his favor. His employees feared him. His competitors respected him. Nobody in his orbit would have described him as kind. Sofia had seen him in person, exactly 3 times before everything changed. The first time, he had walked past her in the hallway on the 32nd floor without looking at her. The second time, he had asked her to move her cart so he could pass through a doorway. Using the tone a person uses when speaking to an inconvenient piece of furniture. The third time had been the morning she spilled a small amount of cleaning solution near the elevator bank and he happened to step around it, making a sound of irritation under his breath that she heard clearly, even from 15 feet away. She had never spoken a full sentence to him. He did not know her name. That changed on a Tuesday in March. Preston had called a meeting with his events team about the annual Hale Foundation Gala, which was the one charitable event he hosted each year and which served the dual purpose of raising money for the children's literacy program his mother had founded and of reminding the city's most powerful people that Preston Hale was the kind of man they wanted to know. The meeting happened in the large conference room on the 38th floor, and Sofia was cleaning the smaller room next to it, the one with the glass partition wall that looked directly into the conference space. She was not trying to listen. She was focused on the baseboards, which had a particular buildup of dust near the south corner that the previous shift had missed. And she was working methodically and quietly, the way she always did. But the voices carried through the partition clearly, and what she heard made her hands go still. Preston was speaking about the gala's opening segment. His events coordinator, Lena Park, sat to his left with a laptop open, and Raymond Tate, the financial director, sat across from them both with a legal pad and the expression of a man who had learned to keep his opinions behind his teeth. Preston said he wanted something different for this year's opening. He said the usual format, the welcome speech followed by cocktails and mingling, was too predictable for an event of this caliber. He said he had been thinking about contrast, about the visual power of showing people something unexpected right at the beginning, something that would set a tone and make the night unforgettable. Lena asked what he had in mind. He said he wanted a woman from the cleaning staff to walk the entrance alone before the guests came in. He described it as a statement about the work the foundation did, about elevating people from difficult circumstances, about showing the gap between where some people started and where others had arrived. He said it would be moving. He said it would make people feel something real instead of just sipping champagne and checking their watches. Raymond. Tate looked at his legal pad and said nothing. Lena asked which member of the cleaning staff he was thinking of. Preston, said the woman with the dark hair who worked the upper floors. He said she had the right look for it, by which he meant she looked worn. He meant she looked like someone who clearly did not belong in a room full of people wearing $10,000 gowns. He meant the gap between her and his guests would be obvious and immediate. It would create exactly the kind of emotional reaction he was engineering. He said her name was something like Sandra. He was not certain. Her name was Sofia. She pressed her back against the wall of the adjacent room and stayed completely still. She could feel her own heartbeat. Not because she was frightened, but because something was happening inside her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. It was not humiliation, though the plan was humiliating. It was not anger, though she had every right to it. It was something older and fiercer than either of those things. It was the feeling of a person who has been walking with their eyes down for years and has suddenly looked up. Sofia had not always pushed a mop cart through the corridors of other people's buildings. There had been a time, not so long ago in years, but so far away in every other sense, when she had been someone that people in rooms like this one paid to know. She had been a brand strategist and personal image consultant with a client list that included 3 Grammy-winning musicians, the sitting governor's wife, and a network of executives who came to her when they needed to walk into a room and make it stop. She had built that career from nothing, studying every book and taking every unpaid internship and working until the work became reputation, and the reputation became a business, and then Warren Gould had taken it from her. She had not thought about Warren in weeks. She had trained herself not to, because thinking about Warren led to a kind of rage that made it hard to function. And Sofia could not afford to be the kind of person who could not function. But standing against that glass wall, listening to Preston Hale casually describe using her as a prop, she felt Warren's name rise up in her mind like something buried that refused to stay down. She would deal with that later. Right? Now she was making a decision. She pulled her cart away from the wall quietly and moved down the hallway toward the service elevator. She pressed the button and waited. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and stood in the mirrored interior and looked at herself. The uniform, the worn shoes, the hair pulled back into a practical knot, the hands that were rough from the chemicals she used every day. She looked at herself for a long moment, and then she took out her phone and found a name in her contacts that she had not called in 3 years. The name was Claudette Marsh. Her finger hovered over the number as the elevator descended. Then she pressed call, and she waited. And when the voice on the other end answered with a sleepy hello, Sofia closed her eyes briefly and said, "Claudette, it is Sofia. I know it has been a long time, and I know I owe you an explanation. But right now, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." There was a pause on the line. Then Claudette said, "Sofia Reeves, I have been waiting 3 years for this call. Talk." The elevator reached the basement level, and the doors opened to the gray service corridor. And Sofia walked out into it with her shoulders straight and something in her expression that none of her coworkers had ever seen before. A woman named Greta, who worked the morning shift alongside her, saw Sofia coming down the hallway and stopped mid-step because there was something different about the way Sofia was moving. Not faster, not louder, just different. Like a person who had just remembered something important about who they were. The gala was in 12 days. 12 days was enough. Claudette Marsh lived above her studio in a narrow apartment that smelled permanently of fabric dye and strong tea. The studio itself occupied the entire ground floor of a converted townhouse in the older part of the city. The kind of neighborhood where the buildings had character and the rents had not yet caught up with the demand. Bolts of fabric leaned against every wall. Dress forms stood in clusters like a silent congregation. Sketches covered a corkboard that stretched the full length of one wall. Hundreds of them pinned edge to edge without any particular order, Just ideas that Claudette had needed to get out of her head and onto paper before they disappeared. Sofia had not been inside that studio in 3 years. But when Claudette opened the door the morning after their phone call, it felt like returning to a place that had been waiting quietly for her the whole time she was gone. Claudette was 50. The close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead, even when she was not reading anything. She had the posture of a woman who had decided early in life that she would take up exactly as much space as she deserved, which was considerable. She looked at Sofia standing on the doorstep, and she did not say anything dramatic. She just stepped aside and held the door open wider and said, "Coffee is already on." They sat across from each other at the long work table in the center of the studio, and Sofia told her everything. She had not told the whole story to anyone before. Not completely, not in order, not with all the pieces in their proper places. She had lived inside it for so long that it had stopped feeling like a story and started feeling like weather, like something permanent and ambient that simply surrounded her. But sitting across from Claudette, watching her friend's face move through careful attention, and then quiet fury, and then something that looked like grief, Sofia heard her own life clearly for maybe the first time. She told Claudette about Warren Gould, who had been her business partner for 4 years. She had met him at an industry conference and had been impressed by the precision of his thinking and the ease with which he moved through rooms full of influential people. He had approached her about a partnership. She would handle the creative work, the client relationships, the strategy and image consulting that was already making her name. He would handle the business infrastructure, the contracts, the financial management, all the operational machinery that allowed talented people to focus on their talent. It had seemed like a clean and sensible arrangement. For the first 2 years, it had been exactly that. The business grew. The client list expanded. Sofia was doing the best work of her career, and Warren was, as far as she could see, keeping everything running smoothly behind the scenes. She did not find out until much later that the smoothness was a performance. Warren had been redirecting company funds into personal accounts from the very beginning of their partnership. He had done it carefully, in amounts small enough not to trigger immediate alarm. Through a series of financial structures that looked legitimate on paper, unless you knew exactly what you were looking at. Sofia had trusted him with the finances completely, because that was the arrangement they had agreed on, and because trust had always been the way she operated. She had built her career on it. When the money ran out and the business collapsed, Warren was ready. He had spent months preparing the narrative before Sofia even knew there was a crisis coming. He told their clients that Sofia had been mismanaging the finances for years. He told their industry contacts that the collapse was the result of her recklessness. He had documents which he had falsified, and he had charm, which was real. And he had connections, which he had been cultivating at Sofia's expense for 4 years. By the time Sofia understood what had happened, Warren's version of events had already settled into the minds of everyone who mattered. She had tried to fight it. She had gone to a lawyer who told her the case would take years and cost money she did not have. She had contacted clients directly, but most of them had already chosen the easier story, the one that did not require them to admit they had been deceived by someone they trusted. She had made phone calls that were not returned, and sent emails that went unanswered, and stood outside office buildings, waiting for meetings that were canceled at the last minute. And through all of it, Donna had been getting sicker. The Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis had come in the middle of the worst of it, when Sofia was already underwater. The medical bills had started arriving at the same time the last of her savings was running out. She had made a calculation that was not really a calculation at all, because there was only one possible answer. Donna came first. Donna would always come first. Sofia had taken the cleaning job because it was immediate and it paid weekly. It came with basic health coverage that she could extend to Donna. And she had walked into Hale Tower on her first morning telling herself it was temporary. 3 years later, temporary had become her life. Claudette listened to all of it without interrupting. When Sofia finished, the studio was very quiet. Outside on the street, a delivery truck rumbled past. One of the dress forms near the window caught the morning light. "I knew it was not your fault," Claudette said finally. "I want you to know that I never believed what Warren said. Not for a single day." Sofia looked at her hands, wrapped around the coffee cup. I was ashamed. I know that does not make sense, because I did not do anything wrong. But shame does not care about logic. No, Claudette agreed. It does not. I stopped calling people. I stopped answering calls. I told myself I would reach out again when I was back on my feet. And then back on my feet kept moving further away, and eventually I stopped expecting to get there. Claudette reached across the table and put her hand over Sofia's. Hey, she did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about this gala." Sofia told her about Preston Hale and his plan. She told it plainly, without dramatizing it, just the facts of what she had overheard through the glass partition. Preston's voice describing her as the right look. The calculated use of her worn appearance as a visual device to make his wealthy guests feel something in the first 5 minutes of an evening about themselves. Claudette's expression did not change while Sofia spoke, but her hand tightened slightly on the coffee cup. "He does not know who you are," Claudette said. "No, he looked at you every day for 3 years, and he has no idea." None. Claudette stood up and walked to the corkboard. She stood in front of it with her arms folded and her reading glasses still pushed up on her forehead, and she stared at the sketches the way she stared at problems she was working through. Sofia watched her and waited. "I have a piece," Claudette said quietly. She turned to look at Sofia. "I designed it 8 months ago, and I could not figure out who it was for. I kept pulling it out and looking at it and putting it away again. I think I know now." She went to the back of the studio where a clothing rack stood behind a curtain of pale linen. She pulled the curtain aside and moved along the rack until she found what she was looking for. She lifted it off the rail and carried it to the center of the room and held it out. Sofia stood up slowly. The dress was deep navy, the color of the sky at the exact moment before it becomes fully dark. That transition moment when everything is still visible but has taken on weight and depth. The fabric had a subtle texture that caught light differently depending on the angle. Structured at the shoulders and then falling in clean, decisive lines. It was not decorated. It did not need to be. Its power was in its restraint, in the certainty of every single choice that had gone into making it. Sofia reached out and touched the fabric. "Claudette," she said, "I know. This is extraordinary." "It was waiting for you," Claudette said simply. "Try it on." Sofia went behind the dressing screen in the corner of the studio and changed into the dress. When she stepped out and turned to face the long mirror that stood against the east wall, both women were silent for a moment. The dress fit as though it had been made with Sofia's specific body in mind, which in some way it had, because Claudette had always designed with certain people's energy in mind, even when those people were not present. It did not transform Sofia. That was the wrong way to think about it. What it did was remove the camouflage. It stripped away the 3 years of deliberate invisibility and let what had always been underneath come forward into the light. Sofia looked at herself and felt something move through her that she did not immediately have a name for. It was older than confidence. It was the feeling of a person recognizing themselves after a very long absence. "We need shoes," Claudette said. Back to practical matters with the efficiency of a woman who knew that sentiment was most useful when it was brief. "And we need to talk about hair and makeup. Do you still know anyone?" Sofia thought for a moment. "Patrick Lowe. He did hair and styling for half my clients back in the day. We worked together on the governor's gala in 2019. Call him." "I do not know if he will remember me." "Call him anyway." Sofia called Patrick Lowe from the studio that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring, and when she said her name, there was a pause, and then he said, "Sofia Reeves. I heard some ugly things about what happened to you, and I did not believe a word of them." He agreed to come in 2 days. Before the gala to do a full consultation and come back the morning of the event for the complete transformation. That afternoon, while Claudette made alterations to the fit of the dress, Sofia sat at the work table and thought about Warren Gould. She had not let herself think about him strategically in a long time. She had suppressed him the way you suppress a wound that is too deep to look at directly. But now she let herself think clearly. She did not know yet whether Warren would be at the gala. What she did know was that Preston Hale's foundation was connected to wealthy donors across the city, and Warren had spent the years since her collapse doing exactly what manipulative people always do. When they have taken something from someone, he had moved up. He had used the connections and the capital and the reputation he had built at her expense to position himself among precisely the kind of people who attended events like Preston's gala. There was a reasonable chance he would be in that room. And if he was, Sofia decided she was not going to pretend she had not seen him. She was not going to look away or leave early or find a quiet corner. She had been quiet for 3 years. She had been invisible for 3 years. She had absorbed the consequences of his theft and his lies and his casual destruction of her life while he went on living his without consequence. The gala was in 9 days. On the 7th day, Claudette called to say that the dress was finished. Every seam was perfect. Every line was intentional. It was, Claudette said with the confidence of someone who had been making clothes for 25 years, the best thing she had ever made. On the 8th day, Sofia went back to Hale Tower for her shift. She pushed her cart through the corridors and emptied the bins, and scrubbed the surfaces, and was invisible in all the ways she had learned to be invisible. But something had changed. It was internal mostly, but Greta noticed it again when they crossed paths near the 11th floor elevator bank. "You seem different lately," Greta said. "Do I?" "Like you were waiting for something." Sofia smiled and did not answer right away. She pushed her cart around the corner and then, just before she was out of earshot, she said over her shoulder, "Not waiting, arriving." Greta stood in the hallway and watched her go, and could not entirely explain why those 2 words stayed with her for the rest of the day. On the 9th morning, Preston Hale walked past Sofia in the lobby, as he always did. Without looking at her, without knowing her name, Lena Park had confirmed with Sofia the previous afternoon that she should arrive at the building an hour before the gala guests, that she should use the main entrance, and that she would be directed from there. Lena had said it in the careful tone of someone delivering instructions to a person who is not expected to ask questions. Sofia had said, "I understand exactly what I am walking into." Lena had blinked. "Good. Then we will see you tomorrow evening." Tomorrow evening. Sofia rode the first bus home that night and made dinner for Donna and sat with her while she did her physical therapy exercises and listened to her daughter talk about a book she was reading. Later, after Donna was asleep, Sofia went to the small closet where Claudette had hung the dress in a garment bag 2 days ago. She did not take it out. She just put her hand against the bag for a moment. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in 3 years, she slept without dreaming of anything dark at all. The evening of the Hale Foundation Gala arrived the way important nights always do, quietly at first and then all at once. The city outside was doing what it always did on a Friday in early April, moving fast and loud and indifferent to the lives happening inside it. But inside Claudette's studio, time had taken on a different quality. It moved slowly and deliberately, the way it does when something that has been building for a long time is finally about to arrive at its destination. Patrick Lowe had been there since noon. He was a tall man with careful hands and the kind of focused silence that the best artists carry with them when they are working. He had set up his tools along the work table with the precision of a surgeon, and he had not rushed a single moment of the process. When Sofia sat down in the chair in front of the mirror, Trek stood behind her and looked at her reflection for a long time before he touched anything. "I remember the first time we worked together," he said. "You walked into that prep room before the governor's gala, and every person in there stopped what they were doing. Not because of what you were wearing, because of the way you carried yourself. Like you knew something the room did not know yet." Sofia looked at her reflection. "That woman feels very far away. She is sitting right in front of me," Patrick said. "She just needs a little help remembering where she put herself." He worked for 3 hours. He worked on Sofia's hair with the patience of someone who understood that the goal was never to create something artificial, but to reveal what was already there. To bring forward the structure and strength that the years of pulling her hair back into practical knots had hidden, he shaped it into something that was both polished and natural. The kind of style that looked effortless precisely because of how much skill had gone into it. When he moved to the makeup, he used the same philosophy, building depth and definition without masking anything, letting Sofia's face be fully itself. But with every feature at its most articulate, Claudette spent that time making the last of her checks on the dress. going over every inch of it one final time with the focused attention of someone who knew that perfection was not a destination, but a practice. She had found a pair of shoes 2 days earlier, deep navy heels that matched the dress with an exactness that seemed impossible for something that had not been made specifically to accompany it. She had also, without telling Sofia, tracked down a very simple piece of jewelry, a single gold cuff bracelet that had no ornamentation at all. Just a clean curve of warm metal that would catch the light of the gala's chandeliers. When the time came to put the dress on, all three of them were quiet. Sofia stepped behind the screen. She could hear Claudette and Patrick moving softly around the studio. The small sounds of preparation, the click of a case closing, the rustle of fabric. She put the dress on carefully, feeling the fabric settle around her with that quality it had of being inevitable, a fitting not just her body, but some essential version of herself that had been waiting patiently for a suitable occasion. She stepped out from behind the screen. Patrick put his hand over his mouth. His eyes went bright immediately. Claudette stood completely still for a moment. Then she walked forward and made one tiny adjustment to the left shoulder seam, a correction so small that only she could see what she was correcting. And then she stepped back and looked at Sofia the way an artist looks at a finished work, not with pride exactly, but with the specific satisfaction of someone who has done exactly what they set out to do. "There she is," Claudette said softly. Sofia turned to face the long mirror. The woman looking back at her was not a stranger. That was the thing that surprised her most, the absence of strangeness. She had expected to feel like she was looking at someone else, at a version of herself that belonged to a different life. But the woman in the mirror was simply Sofia, fully herself, completely present. Without the layers of exhaustion and invisibility that 3 years of survival had pressed down onto her like weight. The dress moved when she moved. The light found her the way light finds things that are meant to be seen. She thought of Donna. She thought of the morning she had sat on the edge of Donna's bed and whispered that today she was getting back up for herself as much as for her daughter. She thought of every bus ride before dawn and every corridor she had cleaned and every time she had made herself small, so that the people around her could feel large. She was done being small. "Let's go," she said. The car that Claudette had arranged pulled up outside the studio at 7:15. It was not a limousine. It was a clean, dark sedan, understated and certain, which was exactly right. As Sofia moved toward the door of the studio, Claudette stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Whatever happens in there tonight," Claudette said, "you walk in knowing that you earned every single step of that entrance. Not tonight. Over the last 3 years, every morning you got up when you had every reason not to. That is what you are walking in with." Sofia squeezed her hand. "Come with me." Claudette shook her head. "This is your room, not mine. But I will be waiting right here when you get back, and you are going to tell me everything." Sofia nodded, got into the car, and watched the studio disappear behind her as they pulled away into the city. Hale Tower was transformed. The building's main entrance had been dressed with tall floral arrangements and soft lighting that turned the familiar marble facade into something that belonged to a different world. A red carpet ran from the curb to the front doors. Press photographers stood in clusters along the sides. Guests were already arriving in a steady stream, women in elaborate gowns, and men in dark suits, voices carrying in the cool April air the particular sound of wealth gathering in one place. Sofia sat in the back of the car and watched through the window. She recognized the building. She had entered it 5 days a week for 3 years through the service door on the building's east side. She knew every corridor and stairwell and utility closet in it. She knew which elevator was slowest and which floor had the heating vent that rattled in cold weather. She knew this building the way you know a place when you have cleaned it, which is more intimately than its owners ever know it. Tonight she was going through the front door. The driver pulled to the curb. He came around and opened her door, and Sofia stepped out onto the red carpet. The photographers near the entrance did not know her name. There was a half-second of stillness from them, the professional pause of people trying to determine whether the woman who had just stepped out of the car was someone they should be photographing. And then, because of the way she moved, because of the absolute quiet authority that came off her as naturally as warmth comes off a fire, they started shooting anyway. Sofia walked toward the entrance without hurrying. Each step was placed with intention, not with performance, but with the genuine steadiness of a person who has decided something and is living. Inside that decision completely, she could hear the cameras. She did not look at them. She looked straight ahead at the doors of the building she had cleaned for 3 years, and she pushed them open and walked inside. The lobby had been transformed just as completely as the exterior. The usual corporate coldness of the space had been replaced with candlelight and flowers, the low, warm sound of a string quartet playing near the far wall. Guests filled the space, talking and drinking and radiating the specific ease of people who are accustomed to being in rooms like this one. Lena. Park appeared at Sofia's side almost immediately, holding her tablet with the expression of someone executing a plan. "You are right on time," Lena said. "The guests will move into the main ballroom in about 15 minutes. Mr. Hale wants you positioned at the entrance before they come in." She glanced at Sofia, and something crossed her face. A flicker of surprise that she managed almost immediately. "You are ready?" "Completely," Sofia said. Lena led her toward the ballroom doors. As they moved through the lobby, Sofia scanned the room with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years understanding how people occupied space. She was looking for one face specifically. She did not see it in the lobby. That meant nothing either way. The ballroom doors were closed. On the other side of them, Sofia could hear the final movements of the event staff completing their preparations. Lena spoke into an earpiece, confirming timing. Around them, the lobby crowd was beginning to orient itself toward the ballroom, sensing that the main event was about to begin. Preston Hale moved through the crowd toward the ballroom entrance. He was dressed immaculately, dark suit, silver tie. The calculated elegance of a man who understood image well enough to deploy it, but not well enough to respect it in others. He saw Lena first. Then his eyes moved to the woman beside her, and he stopped walking. He genuinely did not recognize her. He stood there for 2 full seconds, looking at Sofia with the expression of a man who has encountered something his mind cannot immediately categorize. Sofia watched him working through it, watched the moment when the recognition finally arrived, watched his face move through confusion, and then a strange, arrested quality, like a sentence that has lost its ending. "Lena," he said, and his voice had something unfamiliar in it. "Is that?" "Sofia Reeves," Sofia said, answering for herself. "You asked me to be here, Mr. Hale. I am here." Preston looked at her for another moment without speaking. Then he straightened, and the control came back into his face, and he said, "Good, you are ready to go in." "I am," Sofia said. The ballroom doors opened. The room beyond was everything Preston had designed it to be. The chandeliers burned gold above 320 guests arranged at round tables that filled the vast space. The flowers were extraordinary, white and ivory arrangements that anchored each table and climbed the pillars along the walls. The string quartet had moved inside and was playing something soft and expectant. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, and the particular atmosphere of a room full of people who are waiting for something worth remembering. Sofia walked in alone. She moved through the open doorway and onto the long, central aisle that ran from the entrance to the stage at the far end of the room, and she walked it the way she walked every space, the way she had always walked, with her back straight and her eyes forward, and every movement deliberate and unhurried. She was not performing. She was simply present. The difference between those two things was everything. The room noticed her. The way a room notices something that cannot be ignored. It did not happen all at once. It moved in a wave, table by table, conversation by conversation. A progressive silencing that spread from the aisle outward until the entire ballroom had gone quiet. 320 people looked at Sofia Reeves, and not one of them felt pity. And not one of them felt the comfortable superiority that Preston had planned to give them. What they felt was something closer to the sensation of being in the presence of a person who is fully, completely, unambiguously themselves. Sophia stopped in the center of the room. The silence held, and then a voice came from a table in the third row, a woman's voice, clear and certain. I know who that is. The woman who stood up was named Helen Voss. She was 68 years old, and had been the city's most influential socialite for 30 years. The kind of person whose opinion shaped the room's opinion the moment she expressed it. She had thick white hair and eyes that had seen enough of the world to know. Immediately, when something genuine was standing in front of her, she pushed back her chair and stood up fully and looked at Sofia with an expression of recognition that was also an expression of joy. Sofia Reeves, Helen said, and her voice carried to every corner of the silent room. I have been asking about you for 2 years. Where on earth have you been? The murmur that moved through the room was immediate and electric. Names and memories attached themselves to Sofia's name as people began to place her, began to connect the woman standing at the center of the ballroom to the reputation that Warren Gould had tried to bury. The Reeves agency, the clients, the work. People who had been in rooms where Sofia had transformed how someone was seen began turning to the people beside them and saying her name. Preston Hale stood at the edge of the room near the door with Lena Park beside him and Raymond Tate just behind. And his expression was the expression of a man watching something he built very carefully come apart in real time. Sofia looked at Helen Voss and smiled. The smile was warm and genuine and completely unguarded. I have been here, Helen, she said, letting her voice carry the way she knew it could when she chose to use it that way. I have been in this building, actually. I have been cleaning it. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the first one. I worked as a member of the cleaning staff here at Hale Tower for 3 years, Sofia continued. She was not addressing any one person. She was addressing the room, all of it, every face turned toward her. I took that job because my daughter needed medical care, and I needed health insurance and a weekly paycheck. And when you need those things, you take the work that offers them. I am not ashamed of that work. I did it well, and I did it honestly, and I showed up for it every single day. Helen Voss had not sat back down. Several other people had risen from their seats. I am here tonight because Mr. Preston Hale invited me, Sofia said. She turned her head and found Preston at the edge of the room. His face was unreadable now, sealed over with the controlled blankness of a man who has lost the narrative, but has not yet decided what to do about that. He invited me to serve as a visual contrast. The cleaning woman walking the aisle before the real guests arrived, the before to make the after more impressive. Those were essentially his words, shared with his event coordinator and his financial director in the conference room on the 38th floor 9 days ago. Raymond Tate, to his credit, did not look away. Lena Park looked at the floor. I accepted the invitation, Sofia said, because I decided that if someone was going to put me in the center of this room, I was going to be fully myself when I got there. A woman near the front began to applaud. Then another. Then a man at the table beside them. Within seconds, the applause was moving through the room like weather, building from scattered to sustained to something that filled the ballroom completely. In the middle of that applause, Sofia's eyes found another face. Warren Gould was seated at a table near the left wall. He was dressed well, and he was sitting very still, and his face had the color of someone who has just understood that the ground beneath them is not as solid as they believed. He was staring at Sofia with an expression that contained, in equal measure, recognition and fear, and something that might, in a more self-aware person, have been shame. The applause was still going when Sofia walked toward his table. The guests near him noticed, and the applause began to fade as people tracked Sofia's direction and understood what was happening. By the time she reached Warren's table, the room was quiet again. Warren looked up at her. He did not stand. Sofia, he said. His voice was careful. This is not the place for... You stole 4 years of work and you destroyed my name, Sofia said. Her voice was level and clear and loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every word. You redirected every dollar the company had into your own accounts. And then you told our entire industry that I was responsible for the collapse. You had documents made and you used connections we built together to make sure nobody would listen to my side of it. and then you moved on. You came to galas. You made donations. You sat at tables like this one, and you let the story you invented about me settle into fact. Warren opened his mouth. I'm not asking for a response, Sofia said. I am not interested in your version tonight. I am simply saying, in front of as many people as possible, what you did. Because the truth does not stop being true, because one person works very hard to bury it. It waits, and tonight it is done waiting. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked back toward the center of the room. Helen Voss started the second round of applause. This one was louder than the first. Preston Hale did not applaud. He stood at the edge of the ballroom with Lena Park and Raymond Tate, and he looked at the room he had designed to showcase his own generosity and power, and he watched it belonging entirely to someone else. Raymond Tate leaned close to him and said quietly, I did try to tell. You, Preston, said nothing. The rest of the evening unfolded in ways that Preston had not planned and could not have controlled. Helen Voss brought Sofia to her table and introduced her to the people around her as though she were presenting a returning champion to a crowd that had been waiting for exactly this. Guests who had been clients of the Reeves agency years ago came over one after another to speak to her. Business cards were pressed into her hands. Conversations began that had the quality of doors opening rather than closing. A woman named Deborah Crane, who ran one of the city's largest public relations firms, sat beside Sofia for 20 minutes, and at the end of the conversation said plainly, I have 3 clients who need exactly what you do. When you are ready to start again, call me first. Warren Gould left the gala before the dinner was served. Nobody at his table watched him go. Preston Hale delivered his prepared remarks from the stage an hour later. He was polished and articulate because he was always polished and articulate. But the room received him differently than it had in previous years. Something had shifted in the way people looked at him. A new awareness that sat underneath the politeness and would not entirely go away. At the end of the evening, when the guests were moving toward the exits and the staff were beginning the quiet work of clearing tables, Sofia stood near the ballroom's tall windows and looked out at the city below. The lights of it spread in every direction, indifferent and beautiful. She thought of Donna at home, probably asleep by now, with a book open on her chest the way she always fell asleep. She thought of Claudette waiting in the studio above the apartment, the kettle probably already on. She thought of the service entrance on the east side of the building, the one she had used 5 days a week for 3 years. And she thought of the woman who had walked through it every morning before dawn, quiet and invisible and holding herself together, with the specific discipline of someone who has decided to keep going. That woman had walked in through the front door tonight, and she was not walking back out the same way she had walked in. Helen Voss found her by the window. I meant what I said earlier, she told her. The city missed you. The work you did mattered. What happened to you was wrong, and the people who knew you knew it was wrong, even when they did not have the courage to say so. I know, Sofia said. I think I always knew. I just needed to believe it was worth coming back. Helen looked at her. And now? Sofia looked out at the city one more time. She thought of Donna. She thought of Claudette's dress and Patrick's careful hands and the name that had just spent an evening being given back to its owner. Now I am back, she said simply. She collected her coat and said her goodbyes and walked through the ballroom and across the lobby and out through the front doors of Hale Tower for what she knew would be one of the last times she entered this building. The red carpet was still there, slightly less perfect now, the edges scuffed by an evening of foot traffic. The photographers had mostly gone. She stood on the carpet for a moment and breathed in the April night air. Then she walked to the car that was waiting, got in, and took out her phone and called Claudette. It rang once. Tell me everything, Claudette said immediately. Sofia leaned back in the seat and smiled, and looked out the window at the city moving past. I will tell you everything, she said. But first I want you to know that tomorrow morning I'm calling Deborah Crane at 7, and I'm going to start putting the Reeves agency back together. A pause. Then Claudette made a sound that was half laugh and half something that required her to clear her throat before she could speak again. I will have the kettle on, she said. I will be there in 10 minutes, Sofia said. She put the phone down and looked out at the city and felt, moving through her chest with the quiet certainty of something that had always been true and was only now being fully acknowledged, that the long, difficult detour of the last 3 years had not broken her. It had done something else entirely. It had shown her, in the most concrete terms possible, exactly what she was made of, and what she was made of was enough. It had always been enough. The world had simply needed a Tuesday night in April and a billionaire's cruelty in one extraordinary dress to be reminded of that. Sofia Reeves was going home, and in the morning she was going back to work.
As this story comes to a close, it leaves behind something more than just entertainment. Stories like this often mirror the complicated emotions people face in real life: love, pride, misunderstanding, ambition, and sometimes regret. When powerful personalities collide, even the smallest movement can lead to consequences no one expected. But now the story belongs to you as much as it belongs to the characters. What did you think about the choices they made? Do you believe the ending was fair? Or would you have handled the situation differently if you were in their place? Every viewer brings a different perspective, and your thoughts might reveal a side of the story others never considered. I had really liked to hear your opinion, so take a moment and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you engaged or made you reflect on relationships and life decisions, please take a second to press the like button. It's a simple way to support the channel and helps this story reach more viewers who enjoy emotional storytelling. And if you are someone who enjoys powerful stories about billionaires, CEOs, and the complicated world of human emotions, make sure you subscribe. New stories are shared regularly here, each one designed to surprise you, move you, and sometimes even challenge the way you see certain situations. You can also help the channel grow by sharing this channel and sharing this story with someone who enjoys dramatic storytelling. Thank you for watching and for being the part of storytelling journey.